When the CEO collapsed in the boardroom, they scrambled for help, but no one had the clearance to access the fail-safe files, except me, the janitor. At least, that's what they thought I was. My name is Daniel Tran. For 15 years, I pushed a mop down the same marble floors I helped design. While they ignored me, I learned every crack in the company. Ever wonder what it's like to be invisible until you're the only one who can save the empire that once betrayed you? What would you have done in my shoes? Tell me. Have you ever been underestimated so badly it became your biggest advantage? They said he didn't have the bite to be a real CEO, too measured, too quiet. But I never thought that was a flaw. Daniel was the kind of man who'd rather pause to understand a system than tear through it. He listened more than he talked. That was his gift, and maybe his curse. Before all this, before the mop buckets and quiet corridors, we lived in a one-bedroom apartment on the edge of Boston, above a bakery that opened at 5 a.m. sharp. Our walls smelled like fresh bread and sometimes burnt sugar. In those early startup days, our dreams were bigger than the space we had. We'd work late into the night at the kitchen table, scribbling on napkins and dry erase boards we found at a yard sale. He handled the back-end systems, the strategy. I handled the meals, the taxes, the encouragement. His ties were lined up in color order, navy, slate, crimson. It wasn't vanity. It was how his mind worked, organized, deliberate, clean, the same way he structured code or analyzed markets. There was a kind of poetry in his logic. Back then, he still had his favorite espresso cup, chipped on the rim, which he claimed made the coffee taste a little more honest. I was staying with my mother in California that week. Her health had turned again, fragile in the way only old age makes inevitable. Daniel had insisted I go. He stayed back in Boston, still hopeful that the board would approve the latest funding round, still hopeful that Greg, his college roommate turned co-founder, would play fair. It was Thursday afternoon when I got the call. Daniel didn't say much, just that I should come home. His voice didn't tremble, but something about the way he paused before saying my name told me something was off. I landed that night, jet-lagged and anxious. The apartment was dim, even though it was only just past dinner. The hallway light outside our door flickered like it always did. An old bulb management never replaced, but this time I watched it longer. It felt like a warning. Inside, he was standing by the window, back to me. In his hand was a single sheet of paper. The printer tray was still open. The air smelled faintly of toner. "They voted me out," he said without turning. I took a step closer. "The board?" "Greg," he replied. "He called an emergency session while I was gone. Said I'd become emotionally unstable, that I was making irrational decisions." I felt a tightness form in my chest. "But that's—" "I know. He forged a statement from me. Claimed I signed over temporary voting rights. Said it was to protect the company in case I spiraled." His voice was flat. Not bitter, not angry, just exhausted. For a moment we stood there in silence. Then he handed me the page. It was an email summary, terse and clinical. The kind of message that changed the course of a man's life in a single paragraph. "You're going to fight this," I said quietly. "I already tried," he replied. "Our lawyers won't go up against theirs, not for me. And the more I push, the more it'll look like I'm losing it." That night, we didn't eat. He sat on the couch, tie loosened, still wearing the shoes he'd worn to work. I microwaved a cup of water and added a tea bag, but neither of us touched it. At some point, he stood, walked to the bedroom, and came back with a small box. Inside were the original stock certificates from when he and Greg had split the company 50-50. He stared at them a long time before setting them in a manila envelope. "I'm selling the last 5%, he said. "Daniel," I whispered, "don't let him win." He looked at me then, not with defeat, but with a strange stillness. "He thinks I'm done," he said, "but I'm not leaving. I'm just changing uniforms." It wasn't a metaphor. He meant it. He showed me a job listing for a custodial position, third-party contracted, at the same office tower where Caldwell Innovations had its headquarters. No one would think twice about hiring a middle-aged man with janitorial experience, especially if his resume left out his tech background. I didn't speak, not right away. My instinct was to protest, to tell him we could find another path, but then I looked at his face, calm, focused. There was something alive in his eyes again. Not revenge exactly, but purpose. I knew that look. That night, while he filled out the online application, I stood in our bedroom and began folding his suits. I placed them in garment bags and tucked them into the back of the closet. In their place, I hung up 3 navy blue polo shirts and 2 pairs of sturdy work pants we bought years ago during a camping trip to Vermont. He joined me a few minutes later, holding a printout of the job confirmation. "I start next Monday," he said, "early shift." I nodded. "I'll wake up with you." He smiled. It was faint, but it reached his eyes. Before bed, I passed by the hallway light again. It flickered as usual. But this time, I saw it for what it was. Not a sign of failure, but a quiet reminder. Even dim things still shine. Most people thought he swept floors. They nodded politely when they passed him in the hallway, maybe gave a half smile, maybe not. But I knew better. Daniel wasn't cleaning for a paycheck. He was studying, watching, logging every name, every shift in tone, every pattern of behavior that might someday matter. We moved to East Boston in early 2011 into a second-floor walk-up with drafty windows and creaky floors. It was smaller than our first place, but the landlord was kind and the radiator worked. Mostly. Our bedroom overlooked a laundromat, and every Saturday morning, the scent of fabric softener floated up through the cracks. Daniel adapted quickly. He gained weight, not dramatically, but enough to round his face. He started walking with a slight hunch. He grew a thick mustache, which he trimmed carefully to match the one in the ID badge they gave him on his first day. His name, for everyone else, became Mike. He never corrected them. I adjusted too. I took on remote freelance editing gigs, college essays, corporate blog posts, even romance novellas that needed a softer ending. The money wasn't great, but it was enough to keep us afloat. At night, after he came home from work and washed up, we'd eat dinner. Usually soup, sometimes boxed pasta. And then Daniel would talk. I listened. I always listened. He never stopped bringing things home, not things that looked like much. A torn page from a legal pad, a coffee-stained printout of quarterly forecasts, a half-shredded memo left behind in a recycling bin. I kept a small tray near the fridge labeled Clues. It wasn't a joke. Over time, our kitchen cabinet doors, on the inside where no one could see, became covered with yellow Post-its. Short names, acronyms, arrows. Tiny doodles of decision trees. It looked like chaos. But Daniel could walk me through it like a teacher with a blackboard. These notes were his way of keeping score, not in vengeance, but in vigilance. He started tracking which projects were likely to fail and which would probably succeed. He paid attention to who got credit and who got left behind. He learned the rhythms of the company the way a musician learns a song, by ear, by feel, by intuition. Once, in 2014, I asked him how he managed to keep all the identities straight. "I don't," he said, sipping from a chipped mug. "I remember how they make decisions. That's more useful." Marcus, another janitor on the night shift, never suspected a thing. He thought Daniel was just a quiet, serious guy who kept his cart cleaner than anyone else. Sometimes he'd tease Daniel for how carefully he lined up the spray bottles. "You polish the mop handle too?" He'd laugh. Daniel would smile and reply, "Only on Fridays." Alyssa Caldwell started working there around 2016, fresh out of a business program somewhere expensive. She was Greg's niece, bright but oblivious. She liked to rehearse her elevator pitches out loud while walking the halls after hours. Daniel once quoted one word for word at dinner, complete with her breathy delivery. We both laughed. There weren't many of those moments, laughs, I mean, not for a while, but they mattered when they came. In February 2018, Boston got hit with a record snowstorm. Offices closed, trains shut down, and for once, Daniel stayed home. We had flour, yeast, and just enough hope to try baking bread. The result was dense, uneven, and slightly burnt on the bottom, but when it came out of the oven, we both burst out laughing, the kind of laugh that shakes off years of dust. After we ate thick slices slathered in butter, Daniel reached for a new Post-it and wrote, "Try again, lower heat, longer proof." He stuck it inside the cabinet next to a cluster of ones that mapped Greg's travel schedule. It was a Tuesday in March 2023 when things shifted. Daniel was cleaning the executive boardroom late, as usual. A meeting had run long, and the usual flurry of papers and empty coffee cups littered the space. As he bent to gather some trash from under the table, something caught his eye. A folded sheet of paper, wedged against the leg of a chair. He unfolded it. It was a preliminary term sheet marked confidential, a proposed merger between Caldwell Innovations and a major tech conglomerate called Global Tech. The numbers were astronomical. The margins? Too generous. When he came home that night, I was already in bed, reading a manuscript about a woman who rediscovers love after losing her memory. I looked up when I heard the key turn. He didn't speak at first. He placed his work gloves on the table, then the sheet of paper. "The merger," he said quietly. "It's happening." I sat up. "That's the exit?" He nodded. "But it's not what it looks like. It's a trap." He didn't elaborate that night. Instead, he stood in front of the mirror, studying his reflection. He touched his mustache thoughtfully, then reached for the small scissors we kept in the bathroom drawer. The next morning, he woke up early, earlier than usual. I found him in the kitchen, standing in front of the cabinet, scanning his map of Post-its. He was clean-shaven, the first time in over a decade. I handed him his gloves, freshly warmed from the radiator. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. That was how we worked. Quiet, side by side. He didn't walk like someone delivering cleaning supplies. He walked like someone returning to claim a space he built. I watched him from the break room, perched in a stiff plastic chair with a lukewarm cup of coffee trembling in my hand. The screen was grainy, a little off-color, like a video feed from a forgotten security camera. But I could see enough. Daniel entered through the front lobby. For the first time in 15 years, he didn't use the back stairwell or swipe the janitor's badge he kept clipped discreetly to his hip. This morning, he wore the charcoal gray suit I had hemmed myself, same one he wore to our wedding. I joked then, in case we ever meet someone important. We did. He just hadn't realized the important one was him. The boardroom sat on the top floor, all glass and dark wood, with a table so long it made everyone look smaller. Daniel took the chair at the head, Greg's usual seat, and waited. He didn't fidget. He didn't even glance around. He simply rested his hands lightly on the polished surface, as if he belonged there. Because he did. The room filled slowly. Executives, board members, legal teams, all carrying thick folders and empty confidence. They made small talk, shook hands, adjusted ties. No one noticed Daniel at first, at least not the way they should have. Then the door opened again. Greg Caldwell walked in, flanked by Global Tech's acquisition team. His smile was effortless, camera ready. He wore his usual tailored blue suit, cufflinks flashing. He scanned the room, preparing his entrance. Then he saw the man in his chair. I saw the moment the recognition hit. His face didn't fall. It collapsed. Not all at once, but in stages. The eyebrows drew together, the lips parted, the confidence drained from his shoulders like a slow leak. He tried to recover, walked toward the table like it didn't matter. "I don't believe we've met," he said smoothly, offering a hand. Daniel didn't move. Then calmly, he stood. "Actually, Greg, we have." The room fell quiet. I could hear it through the speakers, how sudden the silence was. Even from the break room 3 floors down, I felt the air shift. "Daniel," Greg said, voice dry, "you look different." "You don't." It wasn't said cruelly, just truthfully. Greg tried to laugh. It came out jagged. "Well, I suppose this is unexpected. You're here as—" "A shareholder," Daniel said. "The shareholder." He pulled a folder from his leather briefcase. Simple, clean, no logo. He laid it on the table and opened it, revealing a stack of documents. Ownership structures, voting rights, proxy filings. Each one dated, signed, verified. "I currently control 60% of Caldwell Innovations," he said evenly. "Acquired legally over the last 15 years. The murmurs started immediately. Chairs creaked, paper shuffled. Greg blinked. "That's impossible," he snapped. "You sold—" "I sold my original 5%, Daniel said. "But I never left." He turned to the global tech team, whose smiles were gone. "You're about to merge with a company you don't truly understand. You think Greg Caldwell built this empire. He didn't. He stole it." I couldn't breathe. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the warmth slip down my cheek and hit my collarbone. I hadn't moved from my seat. My coffee was still full. Cold now. Daniel laid it all out. The forged documents. The emergency meeting called while I was away. The years of silence, of careful planning, of watching this company from the ground up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Power," he said, "isn't loud. It's patient." Greg slammed his palm on the table. "This is nonsense," he shouted. "You're a janitor. You're nobody." Daniel didn't even blink. "No," he said. "You just stopped seeing me." Greg turned to the board. "You can't let him do this. You know me. You've known me for years." "And we've known him longer," someone said quietly. I couldn't see who, but the voice was clear. Then Greg unraveled. His voice broke, rising higher with each protest. He demanded names, accused conspiracies. The room stopped listening. Security was called, not because Daniel asked, but because it became necessary. Greg had lost control of himself, the way only people do when they realize the illusion is gone. On the screen, 2 guards gently but firmly guided Greg out. He protested all the way to the door. The last words I caught were, "I built this." Daniel said nothing. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He adjusted his cufflinks, stood tall, and watched the room reassemble itself around him. No speeches, no theatrics, just calm presence. The kind of presence that says, "I'm not here to take power. I've always had it." I reached out without realizing, pressing my fingertips to the screen. His eyes lifted, maybe sensing me, maybe just coincidence. But for a moment, it felt like he looked right at me. And in that moment, I remembered why I stayed. He didn't fight for revenge. He fought to remind the world who he was. Greg's voice used to be the loudest in the room. Smooth, commanding, theatrical in a way that made you listen even when you didn't want to. But today, it cracked. Not loudly, not all at once. Just enough to expose the panic underneath. By early afternoon, the boardroom had quieted into a strange kind of stillness. The way a theater feels after the curtain falls but before the audience leaves. Some people whispered. Some simply gathered their folders and left without making eye contact. Greg was still there, standing by the window, one hand on the glass, as if trying to hold on to something invisible. A few minutes earlier, he'd been shouting about betrayal, about loyalty, about how this company was his. But now, he was quiet. Daniel stood near the end of the table, flipping through a maintenance report like nothing had happened. It wasn't performative. He was simply doing what he always did, paying attention to the things no one else noticed. An emergency board vote had taken place, hastily but legally. Daniel didn't push for it. He didn't need to. The numbers, the panic, the exposure, it all spoke louder than he ever had. And when it came time to cast the votes, even the members who once smiled too wide at Greg shifted in their seats and said Daniel's name instead. Greg didn't protest the vote. Not anymore. Somewhere along the way, he stopped believing he could win. That was the true loss. Not the position, but the illusion of control. When security reappeared, they were quieter this time. Greg looked at them, then at Daniel, and finally lowered his head. No dramatic speech, no threats. Just a small, clipped nod. He left without turning back. I watched from just outside the hallway. I didn't want to be in the room, not for this part. Part of me felt like an intruder. The other part just wasn't ready to see Greg reduced like that. I didn't hate him, not the way Daniel could have. I just wanted him gone. The glass doors slid shut behind Greg, and the reflection left in them was Daniel's. Same stance, same posture, different man. A board member, one I barely recognized, approached Daniel and offered a hand. "Congratulations," he said. It sounded automatic. Daniel shook it but didn't smile. "We're not done," he replied. "There's work to do." By late afternoon, the office had emptied. The energy had shifted. Quieter, yes, but more grounded. Like the building itself had exhaled. I found Daniel in the CEO's office. Not Greg's office anymore, though it still looked like his. The desk was cluttered. Awards lined the wall. A framed headline from Forbes read, "Greg Caldwell, the face of modern leadership." Daniel was vacuuming. I leaned against the doorframe and watched for a while before saying anything. The sound of the machine filled the silence like a gentle hum. "You don't have to do that," I said softly. He turned it off, looked up at me. "I know." He leaned the vacuum against the wall and walked over to the desk. There, on the edge, sat a pen I recognized. Silver body, engraved initials, GC. It had been a gift, one of the first things Greg gave Daniel when they started the company. I remembered because we'd wrapped it together. Daniel picked it up, rolled it between his fingers, then set it down again. He didn't sigh. He didn't smirk. He just let it go. We stood there together for a long moment. Outside, the sky had turned that soft Boston gray that always made the buildings look more honest. "You okay?" I asked. "I'm here," he said. Sometimes that's the most complete answer you can give. He walked over to the window and stood there looking out, not in victory, not in nostalgia, but in quiet presence. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't triumph. It was a return to who he was before it all broke. There's a kind of stillness that only comes after a long noise. I felt it settle in the room, not final, not heavy, just real. Later, when we were ready to leave, he picked up the maintenance report again. "Payroll's unbalanced," he said, half to himself. "Already?" I smiled. He gave a tiny shrug. "Always." As we stepped into the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. Just down the corridor, Greg's reflection had vanished, and in its place, Daniel's shadow stretched long and quiet across the freshly polished floor. Power didn't change him, but it did return his walk. He no longer shuffled through the lobby like a shadow. He stood straight again. Not stiff, not proud, just comfortable. The way you stand when you're no longer bracing against the weight of being underestimated. It was summer in Boston. The air smelled of hot concrete and early hydrangeas, and the city seemed louder than usual. Maybe it was just that we were quieter. Daniel still left the apartment at dawn. Same boots, same thermos. But now, instead of pushing a janitor's cart, he rode the elevator to the top floor and read reports over coffee brewed in a stainless steel machine with too many buttons. He never used the executive car. He still took the tea, sat near the back, and kept his badge in his front pocket. The first thing he did, quietly without any press release, was authorize a raise for every member of the support staff, janitors, cafeteria workers, night security. Not a bonus, not a temporary adjustment, a real raise. Marcus found out through a line on his pay stub. He called Daniel that afternoon. "Hey, man," he said, voice hoarse. This wasn't a mistake, right?" "No," Daniel said. "You've earned it." A long pause. "Well," Marcus muttered, "guess I gotta stop calling you boss man like a joke now." Daniel smiled. "You don't have to call me anything different." Raymond, the security guard who used to nod politely and look away, now greeted Daniel with a two-fingered salute and a grin that reached his eyes. And the interns, fresh, pressed, eager, started whispering stories. Is it true he used to mop this floor? Why does he know the vending machine code? Did he really clean bathrooms for 15 years? Daniel never answered those questions. He just kept working. On a quiet Wednesday afternoon, he invited me to lunch, not in the executive dining area, but downstairs in the break room where we once watched the merger unfold on an old TV. We shared sandwiches from the cafe across the street. Afterward, he asked if I wanted to see something. He led me down a hallway I hadn't walked in years, past rows of cleaning supplies and old file storage, to a small room with no nameplate. The door creaked when he opened it. "This was mine," he said. "The janitor's closet." It smelled faintly of bleach and time. The shelves were still stocked, but neater. The mop he once carried leaned in the corner like a memory. On the wall, where his name tag had once hung, was a single note: "This space stays unlocked." He didn't say much else. He didn't need to. The room said everything. That night, back home, we ate grilled cheese. Again, I burned the first two. Daniel didn't mind. He laughed, scraped the edges with a butter knife, and said, "Still better than the bread we made in 18. I nearly choked on mine from laughing. After dinner, we sat on the couch, feet tucked under us like we used to when the apartment was colder and our future less certain. "I still don't feel like that office is mine," Daniel said quietly. "It's too tall, too quiet." I looked around our little kitchen. A magnet held a shopping list. A cracked bowl held 2 brown bananas. And on the fridge, still taped there after all these years, was the first note Daniel had ever left me on a Post-it. "But this kitchen," he said, "this always felt like mine." I didn't answer. I just leaned against his shoulder. Later, while Daniel washed the dishes, I opened the closet in our bedroom, looking for a blanket. A box on the top shelf caught my eye. It was old, taped at the corners, labeled in my handwriting from a decade ago. Inside was his janitor's uniform, washed, pressed, folded with care. On top was a note: "Keep this." I held it for a long time, fingertips brushing the collar. It smelled like detergent and dust. But beneath that, it smelled like faith, not nostalgia, not mourning, just memory and choice. The closet door wouldn't close all the way when I tried. I left it like that. Some stories aren't meant to be sealed. They didn't need his clearance code. They needed his clarity. The auditorium was full by the time I found a seat near the back, the kind of space designed for product launches and quarterly wins. Spotlights, a stage, tall plants in symmetrical pots. But today, the buzz wasn't about tech or sales. It was about the people who make things work without being seen. Daniel stood alone at the podium, no notes in hand, no slideshow behind him, just a microphone and that calm, steady presence of his. I watched him from my seat, surrounded by interns in crisp collared shirts and seasoned employees who now looked at him with a kind of reverence. Some whispered, others just watched. A few looked down, maybe embarrassed they hadn't seen him sooner. He didn't talk about Greg. He didn't mention the betrayal, the years in disguise, or the web of silent power he'd built. Instead, he talked about gratitude. Great companies, he said, aren't made from the top down. They're built from the people who show up early, stay late, and do the things that never make the quarterly report. He thanked the cafeteria staff by name. He mentioned the night shift janitors and security officers. He told a story about how the maintenance crew once stopped a flood from damaging the server room without needing to be asked. He ended simply, "Let's build a company where everyone gets seen. No slogan, no applause line, just truth." Afterward, people gathered in small groups, buzzing in soft conversation. I stayed in my seat, watching him step down from the stage. His eyes scanned the crowd until they found mine. He didn't wave. He didn't smile for the cameras. He just walked over. "Ready to go home?" he asked. I stood, took his hand. We stepped out into the late afternoon light. Fall had arrived early in Boston, painting the trees in bold strokes of red and gold. The air was crisp, the kind that makes you think of change and memory at the same time. We didn't say much as we walked. We didn't need to. At the corner near Quincy Market, he paused. A piece of trash, a crumpled coffee cup, sat by the curb. Without a word, Daniel bent, picked it up, and dropped it into the bin. I smiled. Some parts of him would never change. And I was glad. A group of younger employees passed by, still talking about the speech. "Did you know he was just a janitor?" one whispered. Another answered, "He wasn't just anything." A few steps later, a tall intern turned to me. I didn't know his name, but he had that look of someone trying to understand a bigger story than he'd expected to hear. "Did you know he'd be this big someday?" he asked, half hesitant. I thought about it for a second, then shook my head gently. "He never needed to be big," I said, "just steady." That night, back home, Daniel took off his jacket and hung it carefully in the closet. The door still didn't close all the way, and we'd stopped trying to fix it. Some things were better left a little ajar. He set his badge down on the side table. I glanced at it. CEO, it said in bold, but beneath that, written in black marker, were 2 words, former janitor. He'd never erased it, never planned to, and somehow that said more than any title ever could. Sometimes the smallest gesture, like picking up a piece of trash, tells you everything you need to know about a person. Watching Daniel walk beside me that evening, not as a CEO but as the man who never stopped caring, reminded me how quiet strength builds lasting legacies. We often think power comes from titles or noise, but the truth is, it grows quietly, in patience, in work no one sees, in the way we treat those around us. If we take time to notice each other, we might find the real leaders aren't the loudest in the room, but the ones who listen and lift others along the way. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Sometimes, the stories we carry quietly are the ones that connect us most.